My phone buzzed on the desk with the righteous indignation only a suburban security app can deliver. The notification, stark white against a black background, read, "Motion detected at your front door." Ordinarily, this was a cause for mild curiosity. A package from Amazon, perhaps. A neighbor's kid chasing an errant soccer ball. Maybe even, if the stars aligned, a Girl Scout troop armed with thin mints. But I knew, with the kind of deep instinctual dread usually reserved for an impending IRS audit, that this was none of those things. I knew because it was 10:37 a.m. on a Tuesday, and the motion detector of my life, the one person who could find fault in a sunrise, operated on a schedule of relentless vigilance. It was Carol. I leaned back in my ergonomic office chair, a throne from which I, a humble graphic designer, ruled a tiny digital kingdom of logos and branding guides. On my monitor, a half-finished concept for a holistic, artisanal dog food brand stared back at me, its serene color palette utterly at odds with the rage-fueled psychic energy currently being beamed at my front door. With a sigh that condensed all of my life's minor disappointments into a single puff of air, I tapped the notification. The live feed from my doorbell camera filled the screen, and there she was, in glorious, high-definition fisheye. Carol Peterson. Her face, squashed and distorted by the wide-angle lens, looked like a furious potato that had been left in the sun too long. Her blonde helmet of hair was immaculate, her pink polo shirt was crisply ironed, and her finger was stabbing furiously at the tiny black box next to my door. "Alex, I know you're in there!" Her voice tinny and sharp through my phone's speaker. "This device is a gross violation of my privacy." I tapped the microphone icon. Time to feed the beast. "Morning, Carol," I said, my voice smooth and calm. "Everything okay?" "No, everything is not okay," she shrieked, leaning in so close her nostrils filled the frame. It was a Lovecraftian horror. "This camera is pointed directly at my house. It's recording my every move. This is surveillance. It's illegal!" I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee. "Carol, it's a doorbell. It's pointed at my porch. Its field of view happens to include the public street in front of my house, and by extension, the front of your house. Physics is a harsh mistress. And for the record, the only thing I've seen from your house in the last month is your cat, Mittens, judging my lawn care." This was, apparently, the wrong thing to say. "Do not bring Mittens into this," she snapped. "This is about my fundamental right to not be spied on by my neighbors. I feel unsafe in my own home. It's causing me psychological distress." Psychological distress. The official slogan of the chronically bored. I had installed the camera 2 months ago after a series of packages went missing from the neighborhood. It was for security. For Carol, however, anything that existed outside the narrow confines of her approval was a personal attack. My off-white trim instead of eggshell, a passive-aggressive jab, my decision to plant hydrangeas instead of rose bushes, a blatant disregard for cul-de-sac harmony. This camera was just the latest battle in her one-woman war against a world that refused to bend to her will. "I'm sorry you feel that way, Carol," I said, the corporate apology language flowing effortlessly. "But it's a standard security device. Half the houses on this street have one." "Well, theirs aren't pointed at me," she insisted, as if I had personally commissioned a military-grade spy satellite and disguised it as a $100 piece of consumer electronics. "I'm warning you, Alex. You take this down, or you'll be hearing from the Homeowners Association. This isn't over." She jabbed a final, accusatory finger at the lens, turned with the sharp precision of a drill sergeant, and power-walked back across the street to her beige fortress of solitude. The notification ended. Silence returned. I sat there, staring at the frozen image of her furious, distorted face on my phone. The logical part of my brain told me to ignore her, to let the HOA send their toothless letter, which I would then use for kindling. But the other part of my brain, the part that had gotten me into trouble in high school, the part that saw life as a series of absurd provocations begging for an equally absurd response, was buzzing with a dangerous energy. Fighting her with logic was like trying to teach a cat to file its own taxes. It was pointless, and you were likely to get scratched. No, you couldn't fight chaos with order. You had to fight it with a different, more refined kind of chaos. I opened the video file and paused it at the peak of her rage face. I screenshotted it, sent it to my design tablet, and opened my stylus. With a few quick, cathartic strokes, I exaggerated the pointy finger, widened the furious eyes, and gave her helmet hair a life of its own. It was a caricature, a crude one, but effective. And then the idea hit me. It arrived fully formed. A perfect, beautiful, wonderfully petty thunderbolt of inspiration. She wanted to be the center of attention on my porch. She was worried about being watched, being documented. Fine, I wouldn't just document her. I'd commission a masterpiece. That evening, the dog food logo lay forgotten. My digital kingdom had a new, far more pressing quest. I wasn't searching for legal precedent or HOA loopholes. I was scrolling through the underbelly of the local gig economy, a place where dreams and questionable life choices collided. I was looking for an artist. My first thought was a portrait painter. I imagined a stern-looking man in a smock, setting up a giant easel on my lawn. It was dramatic, but too classy, too respectable. Carol might actually be flattered. A photographer was too literal, too real. This situation didn't call for realism. It called for glorious, unadulterated absurdity. And then I found it, nestled between ads for artistic nude photographers, tasteful, and I will paint your pet as a feudal lord. The caricature section. Bingo! It was a gallery of grotesques. Giant heads on tiny bodies, noses like fleshy concords, chins that could plow fields. It was perfect. I scrolled through the portfolios, my grin widening with each click. I needed someone with a certain flair, a style that was more cruel than cute. And then I saw him. Leo the Line King. Leo's portfolio was a masterclass in comedic savagery. He'd clearly spent years working the theme park circuit, capturing the sunburnt, exhausted misery of tourists with a merciless glee. There was a dad with a forehead so large it had its own weather system, a teenager whose braces looked like a downed power line, a woman whose Karen-esque haircut was rendered as a flock of angry, swooping birds. He was the one. He was my Michelangelo. I clicked the contact button and began composing the most bizarre job offer of my life. My fingers flew across the keyboard, fueled by coffee and spite. Subject, artistic surveillance opportunity. Yes, really. To whom it may concern, specifically Leo the Line King, I am seeking a talented and open-minded caricature artist for a unique, ongoing residential project. The position requires setting up a comfortable station on my front porch for several hours a day and sketching, in your signature style, any individual who approaches the property. Subject matter may include, but is not limited to, delivery drivers, mail carriers, religious solicitors, political canvassers, confused DoorDashers, and most importantly, nosy neighbors with a penchant for frivolous complaints. A high volume of the latter is anticipated. The ideal candidate will possess a sturdy sketchpad, a wide array of charcoal and graphite implements, and a bulletproof sense of humor. Discretion is not required. In fact, it's actively discouraged. This is not a covert operation. This is performance art. Payment is negotiable and prompt. Refreshments will be provided. Please respond if this descent into suburban madness sounds like your brand of fun. Sincerely, Alex Miller. I hit send and leaned back, a giddy, nervous energy bubbling in my chest. This was either the most brilliant or the most idiotic thing I had ever done. There was no in-between. Less than an hour later, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. "Is this Alex, the patron saint of weird gigs?" a cheerful voice asked. "Leo, I presume?" "The Line King himself," he said. I could hear the smile in his voice. It was a laid-back, artsy drawl. "I have to be honest, man. I've gotten some strange requests in my day. I once got asked to draw a guy's entire D&D party as the cast of Jersey Shore. But your email is poetry." I laughed, a genuine, relieved laugh. "So you're not calling to report me to some kind of artist ethics committee?" "Dude, no. I'm calling to accept. So let me get this straight. You're gonna pay me my full day rate to sit on your porch, drink your lemonade, and draw people who annoy you?" "Essentially, yes," I confirmed. "You're not just an artist, Leo. You're my frontline defense in the war on suburban boredom. You're a porch trait artist." There was a pause on the line, followed by an appreciative chuckle. "Porch trait artist. I love it. I'm putting that on my business cards." "Okay, I'm in. Man, I am so in. When do I start?" "How's tomorrow morning?" "Perfect. I'll be there at 9. What's the address?" I gave him my address. We quickly settled on his rate, which was surprisingly reasonable for high-level artistic warfare, and hung up. I immediately went to my kitchen and surveyed my beverage situation. I'd need a cooler, and ice, and a variety of lemonades and iced teas. My champion required the finest amenities. As I set up a comfortable wicker chair and a small side table on the porch, a profound sense of calm washed over me. Carol wanted a war. She just never specified the rules of engagement. Tomorrow, the first shot would be fired, and it would be drawn in charcoal. The next morning, I was a bundle of nerves and excitement, peering through my office blinds like a kid on Christmas morning. At 8:59 a.m., a beat-up, sticker-covered hatchback that looked like it ran on pure optimism pulled up to the curb. Out stepped Leo. He was exactly as I'd pictured him, tall and lanky, with a messy bun of dark hair, ripped jeans, and a paint-splattered t-shirt. He had a large portfolio case under one arm and a backpack slung over his shoulder. He looked like he had been airlifted directly from a bohemian coffee shop and dropped into the beige ocean of my cul-de-sac. I met him at the door. "Leo, welcome to the battlefield." He grinned, surveying the peaceful, manicured lawns. "Looks pretty quiet. You sure this is the right place?" "Oh, just wait," I said, gesturing to the chair and cooler I'd set up. "The natives get restless around 10:30. Make yourself at home." He settled in, pulling out a large sketch pad and an array of charcoal sticks, arranging them on the table with the precision of a surgeon. I retreated to my office, my command center, and sent him a text. Me. All systems go. The eagle is in the nest. I repeat. The eagle is in the nest. Leo. Roger that, command. Awaiting first contact. The lemonade is excellent, by the way. Good call on the raspberry. For the first hour, it was quiet. Leo sketched a squirrel for practice, capturing its neurotic energy with a few frantic lines. Then, around 10:15, the first test subject arrived, the Amazon driver. He was a young guy, jogging up the driveway with a box, looking at his phone. He stopped short when he saw Leo. "Whoa," he said, looking from Leo to the box in his hands. "Am I interrupting something?" "Not at all," Leo said smoothly, his charcoal already moving. "You're the main event. Alex, the guy who lives here, is a huge supporter of the arts and logistics. He likes to commemorate all his deliveries." The driver looked utterly bewildered. "For real?" "For real. Hold that pose for me, the one with the box. It's very heroic. The heroic proletariat, I'll call it." Flattered and deeply confused, the driver held his pose. Leo's hands were a blur. In less than 2 minutes, he tore the sheet from the pad and held it up. He'd drawn the driver as a chiseled superhero, muscles bulging, launching the Amazon box like a missile toward the front door. The driver's jaw dropped. "Dude, that is sick! Can I get a picture?" He snapped a photo with his phone, still beaming, and practically floated back to his truck. One successful mission down. I was just texting Leo my congratulations when my internal Carol detector went off. I looked out the window. There she was, emerging from her front door clad in a turquoise tracksuit, ostensibly to check her mailbox, but her mailbox was on her side of the street. Her path was taking her inexorably toward mine. Me. "Red alert! Bogey inbound! I repeat, bogey inbound!" Leo. "The Line King is ready." Carol marched across the street, her eyes fixed on Leo. Her expression was a complex cocktail of suspicion, confusion, and outrage. She stopped at the edge of my lawn, arms crossed. I cranked up the volume on my doorbell's live feed. "And what exactly is going on here?" she demanded, her voice carrying across the lawn. Her tone suggested she had just discovered a meth lab. "This is a residential area, not a boardwalk." Leo didn't even look up from his sketchpad, his charcoal scratching audibly. "Just capturing the local color, ma'am," he said, his voice calm and breezy. "The light here is fantastic. Really brings out the frustration in your jawline. Could you hold that pose? It's perfect." Carol was flabbergasted into a rare, sputtering silence. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She was so used to people cowering before her HOA-fueled wrath that this casual, artistic dismissal completely short-circuited her brain. Leo sketched with a focused intensity for another 30 seconds, then made a final dramatic flourish with his charcoal stick. He blew the dust off the page, and with the grand gesture of a magician revealing his trick, held up the sketchpad. It was a masterpiece of malice. He'd captured her perfectly, but turned everything up to 11. The helmet of hair was a swirling vortex. Her eyes were tiny, angry slits that shot laser beams. Her mouth was a tight, thin line of disapproval. But the centerpiece was her finger. He'd drawn her with a gigantic, gnarled, accusatory finger pointing right out of the page. And swirling around her head like a demonic halo were the words Bylaw 3.7a, property values, and psychological distress. She stared. Her face went from pale to pink to a deep, alarming shade of crimson. For a heartbeat, I thought she might actually explode. But instead, she just made a strangled, gasping sound, turned on her heel, and stormed back to her house, the turquoise tracksuit a blur of defeated fury. From my window, I watched her go. A strange noise escaped my lips, a wheezing, choked sound that blossomed into a full-blown, tear-streaming, side-aching laugh. Leo looked up at my window and gave me a slow, deliberate thumbs up. The first shot had been fired, and it was a direct hit. This was far from over, and I couldn't wait to see what happened next. The victory was sweet, but fleeting. A masterpiece like Leo's deserved an audience. Keeping it hidden away would be like Da Vinci stashing the Mona Lisa in his attic. The world, or at least my six-house cul-de-sac, needed to see it. That afternoon, I made a trip to the hardware store. I returned with a 4x3-foot corkboard and a set of heavy-duty, all-weather mounting brackets. With the solemnity of an artist installing a major exhibition, I mounted the board right next to my front door, in a spot that was impossible to miss from the street. Using 4 simple thumbtacks, I pinned up Leo's first 2 works, the heroic Amazon driver and the masterpiece of Carol's rage. At the top, I affixed a neatly printed label I had designed myself. It read, "The Front Porch Gallery, a curated collection of cul-de-sac life." The gallery needed more content, and I had the perfect plan to generate it. For months, my front yard had been a source of quiet, suburban shame, A patchy lawn, overgrown bushes, and a cracked walkway all screamed, "The man who lives here has given up." It was time for a change. A major landscaping overhaul would not only improve my property value, but, more importantly, would create a steady stream of new subjects for my resident artist. It was the perfect fusion of pettiness and practicality. The next day, a burly man named Gus from Bedrock Landscaping arrived to give me a quote. He was built like a refrigerator, with a thick beard and hands that looked like they could crush stone. He walked the property, grunting his professional assessments, and then his eyes landed on the gallery. He stopped, squinting. Leo was on the porch, just starting a sketch of the mailman, who looked deeply uncomfortable. "All right," Gus said, his voice a low rumble. "I've been doing this for 20 years, seen folks with plastic flamingos, garden gnomes, even one lady with a life-size Bigfoot statue. That's a new one. What's the deal with the funny pages?" I gave him the condensed version: the doorbell, the complaint, the psychological distress, the hiring of Leo. I pointed across the street. "That's the critic." Gus looked from the gallery to Carol's house and back again. A slow grin spread across his face, cracking his stoic facade. Then he let out a huge, booming belly laugh that echoed down the street. "You hired an artist to draw your pain-in-the-ass neighbor? Son, I like your style." He slapped me on the back, nearly sending me into the bushes. "You got the job. I'll even give you a 10% discount just 'cause I want to see how this plays out. And I gotta warn you, my crew, they're a bunch of characters. Your boy here," he nodded at Leo, "is gonna have a field day." My grand, ridiculous plan was coming together beautifully. Of course, the universe and Carol demands balance. 2 days later, a crisp white envelope appeared in my mailbox. It bore the official, vaguely threatening logo of the Oak Haven Estates Homeowners Association. It was the letter I'd been waiting for. I opened it with the glee of a child opening a birthday present. The language was a glorious symphony of bureaucratic nonsense. It cited Bylaw 12.4 regarding non-permanent structures affixed to the home's exterior, and Bylaw 19.2 about engaging in commercial activity in a residential zone. It was a transparently weak attack on Leo and the gallery. The letter concluded with a demand for the immediate cessation of the unapproved activities and removal of the offending structure. They thought they could beat me with jargon. They had clearly underestimated my capacity for creative retaliation. As a graphic designer, I lived and breathed corporate communication. This was my turf. I spent the next hour crafting my response. I designed a new, elegant letterhead for my address, featuring a small, tasteful, and utterly unflattering caricature of the HOA president, a man named Bob, whose face I'd found on the HOA website. I penned a 3-page response, my magnum opus of malicious compliance. In it, I reframed Leo's work not as commercial activity, but as a privately commissioned community beautification art project. The corkboard wasn't a non-permanent structure. It was a temporary, curated exhibition space designed to foster neighborhood dialogue. I cited my First Amendment rights to free expression. I quoted contemporary art critics on the importance of public art. I concluded by cordially inviting the board to the gallery's next installation, which would feature portraits of the dedicated local civil servants, our mail carriers. I printed it on the heaviest cardstock I owned, sealed it in a matching envelope, and sent it back via certified mail, return receipt requested. The ball was back in their court. Let's see them try to regulate fostering neighborhood dialogue. My masterpiece of a letter must have really struck a nerve, because Carol's next move bypassed the HOA entirely and went straight for the nuclear option. 3 days later, as Leo was putting the finishing touches on a dramatic portrait of a pizza delivery guy, a police car rolled slowly down our quiet cul-de-sac and parked right in front of my house. My heart did a little pitter-patter of anxiety mixed with exhilaration. This was a whole new level. I saw Carol peeking through her blinds, a silhouette of pure, unadulterated smugness. 2 officers got out. They were young, younger than me even, and they had the weary, slightly bored expressions of people who spend their days dealing with humanity's dumbest problems. One was tall and lanky, with the name Crumb on his name tag. The other was shorter, stockier, named Diaz. They ambled up my walkway, their eyes taking in the scene. Leo calmly sketching on the porch, the front porch gallery in all its glory, and Gus's landscaping crew, who had just arrived and were now leaning on their shovels, watching the drama unfold. I opened the door before they could knock. "Afternoon, officers. Can I help you with something?" Officer Crumb sighed, the sound of a man who'd rather be anywhere else. "Sir, we received a call about a... Well, she wasn't super clear. Something about a suspicious individual loitering, and, artistic harassment." He said artistic harassment, with the pained expression of someone forced to say a word they know is utterly ridiculous. "Artistic harassment," I repeated, letting the absurdity hang in the air. "That's a new one. Officers, this is Leo. He's a commissioned artist. This is my property. He's drawing pictures. Is there a new city ordinance against charcoal I haven't heard about?" From across the street, a voice shrieked, "He's creating a hostile environment. It's psychological warfare." All of us, me, the cops, Leo, Gus's crew, turned to look at Carol, who was now standing on her driveway, arms crossed, the very picture of aggrieved victimhood. Officer Diaz turned back to me, an eyebrow raised. "Psychological warfare, huh? What exactly are you drawing, son?" he asked Leo. Leo, ever the cool professional, simply tore the current sheet from his pad and handed it to them. It was his sketch of the landscapers. He'd drawn them as a gritty, Dirty Dozen-style commando unit, posing heroically with their shovels and rakes. Gus was in the center, looking like a grizzled sergeant, a cigar chomped in his mouth. Officer Diaz stared at it, his lips twitching. He tried to suppress a smile, but failed. A snort escaped his nose. He quickly passed it to Officer Crumb, who also broke into a grin. "Sir," Crumb said, handing the drawing back to Leo and turning to me, his voice now loud and clear, clearly for Carol's benefit. "This is private property. Your guest is not breaking any laws. There's no suspicious activity here. As long as you aren't blocking the public sidewalk or causing a public disturbance, you're free to, well, to draw whoever you want." He gave me a look that said, "Please don't make me come back here." "Thank you, officers. I appreciate you clearing that up," I said graciously. They turned to leave, but then Officer Crumb paused and leaned in conspiratorially. "Look, between us," he whispered, "this is the most interesting call we've had all month. The chief would lose his mind, but any chance your guy does cops? We've got a retirement party coming up for Sergeant McMillan. He'd love something like this." I couldn't help but laugh. "Consider it a professional courtesy, for services rendered to the community." Crumb grinned. "I'll be in touch." They got back in their car, giving Carol one last, weary headshake as they drove away. Her smugness had evaporated, replaced by a look of pure, impotent rage. She stared at me, then at the cops, then back at me. Defeated, she retreated into her house, the door slamming shut behind her. Gus let out a low whistle. "Well, I'll be damned," he said, shaking his head in disbelief. "You just weaponized the police against a Karen with a caricature artist. I've seen it all now." The project now had the official, if unofficial, stamp of approval from the local police. The gallery wasn't just art anymore. It was a protected institution. With the law, however begrudgingly, on my side, the landscaping project kicked into high gear. My front yard was transformed into a bustling hub of activity, a constantly shifting stage for Leo's art. Gus's crew was, as promised, a gold mine. They were a perfect cross-section of humanity, a living ecosystem of dirt, sweat, and friendly trash talk. There was Donnie, the youngest of the crew, a kid who seemed surgically attached to his phone. He operated the mini digger with a kind of distracted grace, one thumb scrolling through TikTok, while the other expertly maneuvered a bucketful of soil. Leo's portrait of him, titled Donnie and the Distracted Digger, showed him with giant, anime-style eyes glued to a glowing phone screen, completely oblivious to the chaotic whirlwind of dirt and roots he was creating. Then there was Miguel, a quiet, wiry man in his 50s, with a gentle face and arms like steel cables. He rarely spoke, communicating mostly through nods and quiet smiles. He worked with a steady, relentless rhythm that was mesmerizing to watch. Leo drew him in a zen-like state, a halo of light around his head, his rake creating perfect flowing patterns in the soil. He called it the Zen of Miguel's rake. And of course, there was Barry. Barry was the opposite of Miguel. He was loud, boisterous, and convinced of his own photogenic qualities. He was constantly striking poses for Leo, flexing his biceps while lifting a bag of mulch or leaning pensively on his shovel. "Get my good side, Picasso," he'd shout. "Make sure you get the delts." Leo obliged, sketching Barry flexing with a shovel. A hilarious piece where Barry's muscles had their own smaller, flexing muscles. The front porch gallery became the crew's morning ritual. They'd grab coffee from their thermoses and gather around the corkboard to see the latest editions, laughing and heckling each other. Morale was spectacular. Gus told me he'd never seen his guys work so hard or have so much fun. The art had turned a grueling job into a daily performance. The project also provided a perfect shield. The constant presence of a work crew and their large truck gave a noisy, chaotic legitimacy to my front yard that drove Carol insane. When she called the city to complain about the noise from the jackhammer breaking up my old walkway, Gus calmly produced our permit, which allowed for work between 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. When she complained about his truck being a commercial vehicle in a residential zone, he pointed out it was parked legally and was essential for the job in progress. She was powerless, trapped in a bureaucratic checkmate. This, of course, led to a campaign of petty sabotage. Her attacks were small, deniable acts of aggression. Her sprinkler system would misfire, sending a jet of water right onto a freshly laid pallet of sod. A mysterious collection of acorns would appear in a neat pile right where the crew was about to pour concrete for the new walkway. One morning, Gus's truck had a small, handwritten note tucked under the windshield wiper that just said, "Eyesore." We documented everything. Gus took pictures. I saved doorbell camera footage. And Leo, our faithful war artist, captured it all. He sketched a brilliant piece showing a single, malevolent sprinkler head, drawn to look like a cobra, spitting venom across the property line. But his best work came from simple observation. One afternoon, he caught Carol peeking from behind her living room curtains. She was just a sliver of a face in the window, but he captured her perfectly. The drawing was almost entirely dark drapes, with two tiny, furious eyes peering through a narrow gap. He titled it simply, "The Watcher." I pinned it to the center of the gallery. It felt like a turning point. We weren't just reacting to her anymore. We were documenting the very nature of her obsession. The gallery was no longer just a collection of portraits. It was a living, breathing narrative of our cul-de-sac's Cold War, with new chapters being added every day. In the modern suburban ecosystem, a conflict isn't real until it hits next door. Our little war of attrition, confined to the physical space of our cul-de-sac, was about to go digital. It was started by a woman named Brenda from 2 streets over, a power walker who had apparently rerouted her daily constitutional to pass by my house. She posted a blurry cell phone picture of the front porch gallery with a simple, inquisitive caption. "Does anyone know what the story is with this house on Maple Court? They have a live artist and a whole gallery of cartoons on their porch. Just curious." The post detonated like a social media bombshell. Within an hour, it had 24 comments. By the end of the day, it was over 100. The neighborhood, it turned out, had a lot of opinions. Almost immediately, 2 clear factions emerged. Team Carol was small but vocal. It was mostly composed of other HOA true believers and older residents who used phrases like common decency and "what is the world coming to?" One person wrote, "This is utterly tasteless and will surely bring down our property values. The homeowner should be ashamed." Another, clearly a close confidant of Carol's, chimed in, "I happen to know the neighbor across the street, a sweet, concerned woman who is being targeted and harassed by this childish display." But they were a tiny island in a vast sea of Team Alex. The overwhelming majority of the neighborhood found the entire situation absolutely hilarious. My childish display was their entertainment. People I'd never even met were chiming in. "This is the hero Oakhaven needs," wrote one. "I've had my own run-ins with the bylaw brigade. Give this guy a medal," another commented. "My kids and I walked by yesterday. It's the best public art installation in the city," wrote a third. My story, passed through the digital grapevine, was becoming a local legend. This newfound fame had some very strange side effects. My house became a minor tourist destination. People would drive by slowly, pointing. Neighbors started finding excuses to walk down my street, hoping to be immortalized by Leo. A group of teenagers on bikes rode past and did a series of dramatic, synchronized wheelies, shouting, "Draw us, dude!" A woman walking her fluffy white poodle stopped and asked Leo if he did pet portraits. "Bartholomew has a very expressive face," she insisted. Leo was becoming a local celebrity. His laid-back, friendly demeanor charmed everyone who stopped to talk. He was getting so many offers for private commissions for birthday parties and family portraits that he had to start a waiting list. He was making more money sitting on my porch than he ever had at the theme park. Of course, Carol couldn't stay silent. She waded into the next-door thread herself, and it was a strategic disaster. Her comments were typed in all capital letters, filled with exclamation points and furious accusations. "This man is a menace and this art is a form of harassment. He is violating HOA covenants and I have filed multiple complaints. Do not encourage this behavior." She came across not as a concerned citizen, but as an unhinged tyrant. She quickly became a meme within the thread, her comments screenshotted and mocked. Through it all, I stayed quiet. I didn't need to fight. I had an army of proxies now. My supporters shredded Carol's arguments, defended my rights, and shared their own stories of HOA overreach. I made only one post in the entire thread. I took a high-quality photo of Leo's latest masterpiece. It was our mailman, a timid man named Ron, recoiling in terror from a tiny, yapping chihuahua that was lunging for his ankles. The title, in Leo's elegant scrawl, was neither rain nor sleet nor ankle-biter. I posted the picture with a simple caption, "Just wanted to share the latest addition to the gallery, a tribute to our brave USPS workers." The post got hundreds of likes. The digital battle was over. The community had spoken, and they had chosen laughter over bylaws. Defeated in the court of public opinion, Carol fell back on the one institution she still believed in: the bureaucracy. She forced the issue, lodging so many formal complaints that the Oakhaven Estates Homeowners Association had no choice but to schedule a special hearing. The official summons arrived, a document so self-important it practically creaked. It was a formal tribunal to rule on the myriad violations at my address. My attendance was mandatory. The news spread through the next-door thread like wildfire. This wasn't just some boring monthly meeting about sprinkler regulations anymore. This was the season finale. This was the suburban Super Bowl. The entire neighborhood was planning to be there. If they wanted a show, I was going to give them one. This wouldn't be a defense. It would be a performance. I spent 2 days preparing. I went to a print shop and had large, high-quality foam core prints made of every single one of Leo's caricatures. I put together a slick, witty PowerPoint presentation, complete with smooth transitions and embedded images, titled "On the Community-Building Power of Satirical Porch Art." Leo, of course, was invited to attend as my artistic consultant and expert witness. Gus, hearing the news, rallied his entire landscaping crew. "We'll be there," he vowed. "Moral support." The night of the hearing, the community center clubhouse was packed. The air buzzed with anticipation. I saw neighbors I only knew from their next-door profile pictures. The HOA board, a grim trio of retirees led by the president, Bob, the man from my letterhead caricature, sat at a folding table at the front, looking deeply uncomfortable with the crowd. Carol was in the front row, dressed in a severe navy blue blazer, her face a mask of smug certainty. She believed this was her moment of vindication. Bob called the meeting to order, his voice trembling slightly. He laid out the case against me, reading Carol's complaints in a dull monotone. Then, he gave Carol the floor. She stood and delivered an impassioned, rambling monologue about the sanctity of the neighborhood's character. She talked about standards, aesthetics, decorum, and harmony. She presented her evidence, grainy, zoomed-in photos she'd taken from her window of Leo on my porch. She spoke of the constant mockery and hostile environment she had been forced to endure. It was a compelling performance, if you were an audience of one. Then, it was my turn. I walked to the front, cool and collected, and plugged my laptop into the projector. The first slide of my presentation lit up the screen. The title, set in a tasteful, elegant font. "Good evening, everyone," I began, my voice calm and friendly. "My name is Alex Miller, and I'm the menace from Maple Court." A wave of laughter rippled through the room. I clicked to the next slide. It was a scan of the HOA bylaws, with the sections Carol had cited highlighted. "Let's get the boring stuff out of the way," I said. "Bylaw 12.4 prohibits permanent structures. As my exhibit is on a corkboard held up by 4 screws, it is, by definition, temporary. And Bylaw 19.2 prohibits commercial activity. Leo is a private contractor I hired, no different than the man who mows my lawn or cleans my gutters. No commerce is being conducted on the premises. So, technically, I'm in the clear. But that's not what this is really about, is it?" I clicked again. The first caricature appeared on screen. Super Amazon. The crowd chuckled. One by one, I showed them all. Donnie and the Distracted Digger. The Zen of Miguel's Rake. Barry flexing with a shovel. Gus and his crew, sitting in the back, erupted in cheers when their portraits appeared. I showed them The Watcher, and a knowing murmur went through the room. Then, I moved to my final section. Community. I showed them screenshots of the overwhelmingly positive comments from the next-door thread. I read a few aloud. "This is the most fun this neighborhood has had in years. It's brought people together. My kids beg me to walk by the cartoon house every day." I looked out at the crowd, then at the board, and finally, at Carol. "This isn't about a doorbell or a corkboard or an artist," I said, my voice resonating in the quiet room. "This is about what kind of neighborhood we want to be. One that's governed by suspicion and petty complaints, or one that can laugh at itself, one that values conformity above all else, or one that celebrates a little creativity. I think the gallery speaks for itself, and I think tonight, so do all of you." I finished. The room was silent for a moment, and then it erupted in applause. Bob, the president, looked utterly flustered. He conferred with his fellow board members. Reluctantly, he called for a vote on the motion to formally censure me and demand the gallery's removal. "All in favor?" he asked. Carol's hand shot up. So did the other 2 board members. 3 hands. All opposed? A forest of hands went up. It looked like the entire room. Gus's crew all had both hands in the air. The motion was defeated by a landslide. The room cheered. It was over. I had won. Carol sat frozen in the front row, her face pale with shock and disbelief, as her neighbors came up to shake my hand and pat me on the back. Her reign was over. Defeat is a bitter pill to swallow, but for Carol, it was pure poison. She didn't handle the public repudiation well. As the meeting broke up and people milled about, laughing and talking, she tried to argue her case to individuals. "You don't understand. He's making a mockery of us," she pleaded with a neighbor, who just smiled politely and shuffled away. "The bylaws are clear," she insisted to another, who patted her arm condescendingly and said, "Oh, Carol, it's just a bit of fun." Her power, which had been built on a foundation of perceived authority and the implicit threat of formal complaint, had vanished in a single public vote. She was no longer the feared enforcer. She was just the crazy lady who yelled about rules. Stripped of her authority, she was just Carol. And nobody had time for that. She eventually gave up, slinking out of the clubhouse alone, while the rest of the neighborhood celebrated their small, successful revolution. A few days passed. The landscaping was nearly finished. Leo was still on the porch, sketching the endless stream of well-wishers and curious onlookers. I was in my office, trying to find the motivation to finish the holistic dog food logo when I saw her out my window. Carol was in her front yard, aimlessly pulling at a few non-existent weeds in her perfectly manicured flower bed. She looked small, lost. I don't know what compelled me, but I went outside. I just stood on my new, beautifully laid stone walkway. She saw me, and for a moment I braced for another tirade, but it didn't come. Her shoulders slumped. "I don't understand," she said, her voice quiet and strangely thin, robbed of its usual sharp-edged fury. It barely carried across the street. "I was just trying to uphold the standards. That's all I've ever tried to do. Keep the neighborhood nice." And in that moment, for the first time, I saw past the caricature. She wasn't a monster or a villain from a comic book. She was a lonely, bored woman whose world had shrunk so much that the color of her neighbor's trim had become a matter of vital importance. The HOA wasn't a weapon for her. It was a purpose, a club that gave her a title and a reason to interact with people, even if those interactions were negative. I had taken that away from her. I didn't feel guilt, exactly, but I felt a sliver of something like understanding. "The standards are fine, Carol," I said, my voice softer than I intended. It was just the joy-to-bylaw ratio that was getting a little out of whack. She looked at me, and there was no witty retort, no angry comeback. She just looked tired. She gave a small, defeated nod, turned without another word, and went back inside her house. I watched her go. In the days that followed, I noticed a change. Her blinds, which were usually open, with her silhouette visible, watching, were now almost always closed. She stopped her vigilant patrols. The reign of terror was over. The war had ended not with a bang, but with the quiet closing of a curtain. A month later, my front yard was unrecognizable. Gone was the patchy grass and cracked concrete. In its place was a lush green lawn, elegant stone walkways, and beautiful, blooming flower beds. It was, ironically, the nicest yard on the block, a model of the very standards Carol had championed. And right next to the front door, proudly displayed, the front porch gallery remained, a testament to the chaos that had created the beauty. The whole ordeal deserved a proper conclusion, a grand finale. It was Gus who suggested it. "You gotta throw a party, man," he'd said, admiring his crew's finished work. "A block party, christening the new yard." Leo loved the idea. "We can make it an art show, a closing gala for the exhibition." And so we did. We printed up flyers and distributed them throughout the neighborhood. You've seen the art, now come to the party. The first and last Oak Haven cul-de-sac, art gala and block party. The evening of the party was perfect. One of those warm, late summer nights. We blocked off the end of the cul-de-sac. Gus brought a huge barbecue grill. Neighbors brought side dishes and desserts. Music played from a portable speaker. The atmosphere was joyous and communal. It felt like the neighborhood was meeting itself for the first time. The main event was the charity auction. We had decided to auction off all of Leo's original sketches, with the proceeds going to the local animal shelter. I acted as the auctioneer, and the bidding was fierce and hilarious. Officer Crumb and Officer Diaz showed up, off-duty, and got into an intense bidding war over neither rain nor sleet nor ankle-biter, with Crumb finally winning out. Gus bought the portrait of his crew. The heroic Amazon driver, who we'd tracked down and invited, even showed up and bought his own portrait. Every single piece sold. There was only one caricature that wasn't for sale. Carol, Consumer of Joy. It felt wrong to sell it. It was the genesis of the whole thing. I quietly took it down before the auction began, and put it away. As the night wound down, Leo tapped me on the shoulder. "I have one more piece," he said. "A final commission. This one's on the house." He unveiled a final sketch he'd been working on secretly. It was a drawing of me. I was in my office chair, my back to the viewer, but my face was visible in the reflection of my monitor. I was looking at my phone with a devilish, knowing grin. From my doorbell camera, a single, bright beam of light shone out, projecting onto an artist's canvas, illuminating the entire cul-de-sac. The title, in Leo's perfect script, was The Patron. Later that night, long after the last neighbor had gone home, I hung the final portrait on the wall in my office. It was the perfect souvenir. I looked out my window at the quiet, peaceful street, still littered with the happy remnants of the party. My phone buzzed on the desk. Motion detected at your front door. My heart didn't leap with dread. I tapped the notification. It was my next-door neighbor, Brenda, leaving a small plate of leftover brownies on my porch with a thank you note for the party. I smiled. They say good fences make good neighbors. I guess they're wrong. Turns out all you really need is a nosy neighbor, a brilliant artist, and a truly, wonderfully terrible idea. It was, without a doubt, the best home improvement project I had ever done.